Well, you better buckle up because you're going to be in for an interesting ride this afternoon with this young lady. Welcome, Amber Parle.
Hello.
Have you with us? Uh, Amber is, I kept thinking, I want to say, what's wrong with you, Amber? And that's a negative thing, but it really isn't intended to be that. It's just that she really has an adventure to share with you, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So, Amber, let's back up. You moved to Big Bear when? How old were you when you came to Big Bear?
I was 10 years old when I moved to Big Bear with my mom and went to Big Bear Elementary and then Big Bear Middle School and then Big Bear High School and graduated Big Bear High School in 2008 as one of two valedictorians. My co-valedictorian was Cody Reeves, which some of you may know him. And then I went off to UC Davis.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your high school experience.
Mhm.
You were very active in drama, as I understand it, in a lot of
Yes, I
productions,
was.
in a lot of
Yeah.
different productions.
Yeah, I did almost every single production while I was in high school. I think I missed the very first production because I didn't get involved till the spring production of my freshman year, and I did the entire audition in a French accent. And I remember Elena Peavy later told me that one of the panel thought that I was a foreign exchange student, and she was like, "No, no, no, she's in my Spanish class. Like, she's not a foreign exchange student."
Was there a favorite play in high school, Amber, as you think back on that?
Oh gosh. I mean, Beauty and the Beast will always have a special place in my heart just because it was my first play ever. And so that was really fun, and there was singing and dancing and acting, and it was just the whole package. Um, but I also would say that The Crucible, which was the last play I was involved in, has a special place in my heart. And that was just a complete polar opposite of Beauty and the Beast, where it's all like fun and exciting, and The Crucible is just like so serious, but it allowed me to explore a different side of my acting, which I really loved being a part of. It was probably one of the most stressful plays I was a part of, though. So,
Oh. And in addition to your drama involvement, you took 6 AP classes for Pete's sake, Amber. Tell us about that. Why? What is this about? Is this a desire to be the best of the best, or can you talk a little bit about that?
I just have a thirst for knowledge, and then I wanted to take AP Bio and AP Physics, and at that time, the way that classes were organized, it was only possible to take one. You were supposed to pick one your senior year, and I said, well, I don't want to do that, so I ended up doing extra work during summer before my junior year so I could take AP Bio at the same time as I took chemistry, and then take AP Physics my senior year because they were offered the same period. So you were literally only allowed to pick one. But I just loved learning, and I was, science and math were probably two of my favorite subjects. I think just because they were very logical. But then I was also very like I love literature, so I was like I have to do all of it. But so I was really involved in academics, and I remember my mom waking me up several times in the middle of the night because I'd fallen asleep on the couch doing homework, and she's like, you need to go to bed, um, which that passion kind of continued in university, but then I realized that I wouldn't have any type of social life if I continued that. So my third quarter freshman year at UC Davis, I took 27 units, and yeah, I got probably like 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night, and I passed all my classes. Like the lowest grade I got in university was a B minus, so like I passed all my classes, but it just really was a moment where I was like, okay, I did this in high school where academics was my focus, and I participated in extracurriculars, but at the end of the day, academics was my focus. And when I got to university after that 27 unit quarter, I realized there's so much more that I want to do, and if I just do academics, I'm going to miss out on all these different clubs and activities and partial like possible friendships. And I ended up working for the university for 3 years, and so that wouldn't have been possible if I'd taken the rigorous course load that I'd kind of started off with.
Amber, you shared with me that you during your high school experience you wrote an article or had a series, I guess, in the Grizzly, the local paper. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I did. I don't exactly remember how it came about, but I think someone had approached me from the Grizzlies saying, we want you know, kind of a column in the paper once a month or something, talking about what's going on at Big Bear High School, but from a student's perspective versus someone going there and interviewing teachers or interviewing students. And so I think it was about once a month I would write just a short little article about these are the events going on, or like we're planning for homecoming, or you know, we're doing this, we're doing that. And I was involved in student government as well, so I usually knew I knew a bunch of what was going on at the high school because I kind of had my fingers in a lot of different things while I
Yeah.
was there.
Was one of your goals when you started high school to become the valedictorian, or did that just sort of happen? Or
No, that was definitely one of my goals and my ambitions. And it was funny because I remember before my last final, because I had most of the same classes as Cody Reeves, and we'd been the two that like hung in there to become valedictorians. And we made a deal before our last final that if one of us messed it up and got a lower grade, we were still going to let the other one be co-valedictorian. But that wasn't necessary. We both passed, and it was fine.
interesting. So now you're a high school graduate and off you go to Davis.
Woo!
And you started saying that you wanted to be a veterinarian. Talk about that a little bit and how that changed as you got into it.
Yeah, so I had wanted to be a veterinarian for years. My eighth grade career project was on being a veterinarian and living in Hawaii. And I got to Davis and I was all gung ho about wanting to be a veterinarian. And then I realized that really wasn't what I wanted because I love animals in the whole you get to interact with them and get to know their personalities and their uniqueness. And as a veterinarian, most of the time you see animals that are sick or dying or there's something wrong. You don't really get to interact with the healthy animals as much other than an occasional checkup, and you don't get to foster those really close relationships with the animals. And so I realized, you know, that's not really what I want to do. And so I kind of, for my sophomore year, I was still planning on getting the degree in animal biology. I knew I still wanted to do something with animals. And then after my sophomore year, between my, I think it was, yeah, between my sophomore and junior year over summer holidays, I got hit by a car as I was crossing a street. And that was kind of a big wake up moment for me because it really made me look at my life and say, is this really what I want? Or is this kind of a dream that was built upon other people's opinions of what kind of work I should be doing because I'm good at it, because I love animals, because it's a good career? And I have really had to kind of assess my life and think about, well, I, you know, I'm in one of the bike capitals of the US and I was just hit by a car as a pedestrian. My life could end at any second. What do I want to do with it? And travel was actually the main thing that came up. And so, because I'm very much the kind of person that if I commit to something, I like to stick to it. So I finished my degree at Davis. I actually applied for and was selected as the commencement speaker for my graduating class. And then 2 months later, I flew off to South Korea and started teaching English in South Korea.
So this was just some fluky accident? How did, tell us about how, I don't want to get into the gory details, but were you walking down the
Yeah.
middle of the street?
I was meeting a friend for strawberry Nutella crepes at one of my favorite restaurants in Davis, and I was about to cross the street at an unmarked crosswalk, but it was one of those intersections where you know the sidewalk curves down for people to walk across, but there's no actual marked crosswalk. And I looked and I saw this car coming in the distance and I thought, oh, she's far enough, she'll stop. And I started crossing and I look in the opposite direction and there's a car coming and it doesn't look like it's slowing down. So I stopped walking just to make sure they were going to slow down. They slowed down. I started walking again. Meanwhile, other person um, didn't see me. She was looking for a building, was what I was told. And she hit me at 25, 30 miles an hour. And I'm looking, assuming that she's stopping. So I'm looking in the opposite direction, was knocked out on impact, and woke up on the ground with the wind knocked out of me, trying to breathe, having someone screaming, breathe, breathe, talk to me, talk to me. And I'm just thinking, what just happened? Did I? No, 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 no. I didn't. Did I really? What? Just, I couldn't form the phrase in my head, oh my gosh, I was just hit by a car. And it didn't become real until I had someone find my phone and I said, you need to call my mom. And this guy didn't really know how to tell her. He's like, well, your daughter was in an accident. Let me just let you talk to her. And I'm laying on the ground and someone's holding my head still because they don't know if I have spinal injuries, which I did actually. And that's when it became real, was me having to tell my mom, I was just hit by a car, and I broke down crying as I'm hearing like sirens as the ambulance is coming to get
But it
me.
was
But,
really a life-changing event in your life. Maybe one of the
oh
most
yeah.
significant, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say that, I think I probably would have found my way to where I am now in life without the car accident, but I think the car accident was a catalyst in the decisions that I made and the life that I ended up deciding to live.
You were
So,
telling me that some of your work involved the zoo here in Big Bear while you were finishing up your degree.
yeah.
Just a little bit.
So, then the summer after I was hit by a car, I spent my summer volunteering at the zoo up here for my senior practicum, which wasn't exactly like a dissertation. I wanted to explore animal behavior as well as animal enrichment. And so I spent the summer working at the zoo and paying attention to, the different things that were created to keep the animals busy. So little toys, or they'd hide food in different places, and then they'd let the animals out and they had to kind of find their own food, just things to keep them mentally stimulated. And so, yeah, I should have given Tori a picture of this. I helped out with the baby animals too. We got in a baby raccoon that had been attacked by a dog. And so there's pictures of me holding the raccoon and helping out with that kind of stuff up here.
I forgot that, Tori, show us that one picture. Uh, this is a picture of Amber doing the typical, atypical things for Amber. Can you show us that picture, Tori? There she is.
Yeah, so that was my 18th birthday. I gave my parents an ultimatum. I said, I either want to go skydiving or in a shark cage. And since I'll be 18, you really can't say no, but I'll let you pick which one. So
Where was this?
that was in Lake Elsinore. That was my first skydive. I've done 4 in my
Oh,
life now.
interesting.
Yeah.
So now you're a college graduate.
Hmm.
Normal people would use their degree and go off and get a job, but oh no,
Yeah,
not
no,
Amber. So
no.
tell us about your initial adventure. You off to South Korea. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I had actually never been abroad before. I'd never been to Mexico. I'd never been to Canada. I had never been anywhere out of the US. And I flew to South Korea by myself for a year-long contract that I had signed. And it was an amazing experience. Surprisingly, I had more culture shock coming back into the States than I did when I arrived in Korea. And I think that's partially because when I went abroad, I was expecting everything to be different. What I didn't expect was while I was over there, I got accustomed to that being the norm. And I didn't expect things to be different when I came back to the States. But of course, because life in Korea became my normality, when I came back to the States, everything was completely abnormal, and just strange trying to readjust to a life I grew up in. But now all of a sudden, it wasn't my life anymore. But I went all over Korea while I was there. Anytime that I had holidays, I was off hiking in the mountains, or my cousin came to visit for one of the holidays, and we went to Jeju Island, which is just off the southern coast of South Korea. Yeah, it was
You really
amazing.
had a job while you were there, right?
Yeah, I had a job full time. The first 6 months I was there, I taught kids that were age 6, which really means they're age 4 to 5, because Korea has an interesting way that they determine age. So that was my first 6 months, and my second 6 months was anywhere from age 7 to 13, and I had levels everywhere from we're learning ABCs to oh we're studying Mesopotamia and watching Bill Nye the Science Guy because your English level is that high that now we're studying actual subjects rather than just studying English.
And your Korean was, of course, fluent in Korean.
Nope. I knew how to order a soy milk latte, and I knew how to tell a taxi driver to where my flat was, and how to say like stop here and order food, and that was about it. We were actually discouraged. Some of the teachers I worked with, they took Korean lessons while they were there, but we were told that if we learned to speak Korean, we were not allowed to speak Korean to our students because they wanted them to be completely immersed in English, because you learn a lot faster that way.
And you were there for how long?
I was there for a whole year.
Okay, no.
Yeah.
All you that are with me, keep track. This is South Korea, number one. Now what happens, Amber?
So I came home for a little bit, just a couple months, and then I flew to South America with two of my friends to do a 5-month backpacking trip. And the three of us traveled together for a bit, and then we set off on our separate ways. But I went to Peru first, did the Inca Trail, then we went to Bolivia. I biked down the death road in Bolivia, and one of my friend's mutual friend owned a house in the middle of the jungle, and so we went hiking through the jungle, and he was clearing the jungle out with a machete. And then we went to the salt flats in Bolivia, which were absolutely just amazing. I felt like I was in a Salvador Dali painting. They were so surreal. And then I went to Chile, and I did a 5-day hike in Chile in Patagonia. And then I flew up to Colombia to see one of my friends from university who's from Colombia, and ended up staying and working in Colombia for 2 months, living on little islands off the coast of Cartagena and working at an aviary and an aquarium. And that was amazing. The first island I lived on was so small I could swim around it after lunch every day, and got to go hunting for octopus. The dolphin, all the enclosures, there wasn't any type of filtration system because they were in the ocean. So when the tides came in, the water went up in the enclosures. When the tides came out, the water went down a little bit. They didn't feed the dolphins in the morning because they hunted, because fish would swim into their enclosure. But I spent my afternoon sitting on the edge of the dolphin tank giving the dolphin massages with my feet, because they would just swim up, and they would just like roll from side to side while you moved your feet and allow you to rub them. And so that was how I spent my evenings, and then
And you
moved
told
over to, oh, go
me
ahead.
that you actually used your degree, some of that work in Colombia. Is that right?
Yeah, I felt like I did, and my Spanish improved immensely. And but I had, studied animal biology, and animal behavior was my focus. And so when I moved to the aviary, I was training falcons to fly to me and be fed and obey commands of like, come to my arm, okay, fly to the branch, come to my arm. So I was working with like training animals. I also was working with the incubation chambers and the newly hatched animals and feeding them. So we were working on diet, we were working on enrichment, behavior, and the aviary wasn't open to the public at that time. It now is, and I've since then been back to see it, and it looks completely different. But at the time, most of the birds there were confiscated from the black market. And so it was kind of a rehabilitation center as well. And any of the birds that we could rehabilitate and release back into Colombia, we did. And some of the other birds would be shipped off to they would either stay at that aviary or be shipped off to other aviaries in Colombia because they were either too habituated to humans. There was one bird I remember that thought it was a human. It didn't think it was a bird. It was terrified of any bird of its own species. So it would be sitting there, and another bird of its species would come along, and it just ran away and would hide behind a person. So that kind of bird, obviously you can't re-release into the wild because it's never going to go around other birds.
So your time in your 5 months there was kind of a combination of some wandering around various
Yeah.
countries and then the work in Colombia.
Yes.
So now for some reason you come back to Big Bear. Tell us about what that's all about.
Yeah, so I usually, if I need to, I come back to the States if I'm running low on funds, because pretty much all of my travels are self-funded. And I don't like to wait until I have $0 in my account and have to call home. I've never done that, thankfully. Um, but I came back to work for a bit. I ended up substitute teaching in Big Bear for a while, and saved money to go backpacking with my best friend in Europe for 2 months.
Okay,
And
now number three. We've been to Korea, we've been to South America, now we're back to Europe.
now we're going to Europe. Um, and also during the time I was home, I got involved in cats for the first time. And I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Nancy Walker. I'm pretty sure that we had a conversation backstage, and she told me, why don't you apply to acting school? So while I was home, I actually did that on a whim. I applied to an acting school in the UK, and didn't get into their full program, but got into a semester program. So I went backpacking in Europe with my best friend for 2 months. We went to Italy, Switzerland, Scotland, and London. Really, we didn't see any other parts of England other than London, and we didn't go to Wales. And then Ireland and the Czech Republic. And we chose to not go to a lot of countries. I know some people will do the whirlwind. You spend 2 days here, 2 days there. We really wanted to try and immerse ourselves in the culture, so we tried to limit the number of countries we went to. But then I came home for a month to drop off my exploring gear and repack, because then a month after that I went back to London to study acting for 3 months at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts.
Was
So
that, you had an interest in drama, that's kind of been part of your life. Was that a significant learning experience for you in that special?
it was, yeah. Actually, in high school, I had a small crisis where I had a moment, because I had fallen in love with acting so much, where I was like, do I really want to go to school to study animal biology? And I had a moment where I considered applying to schools for theater. And so I think this was me coming back to it and revisiting it by going to the school in London. And it was an amazing experience. Just the people I got to work with, the tutors that trained me while I was there, it helped me come into my own just as a person. So even if I didn't take anything away related to acting from that program, I gained so much confidence, I gained so much self-assurance. And I really feel like I came into my own during those 3 months and went through this kind of transformation of self-confidence during that
Was
3 months there.
were there students from all over the world in this program, or mostly?
Mostly from the US. It was, for those of you that were around last week and saw Amber and Tori talking, it was one of those, since it was a semester program, it was one of those that was usually done as an exchange program for current acting students. So a lot of the people in my particular program were a few years younger than me. They were still in university and they had come over to do a semester abroad. There were a few people that had come for different reasons. So there was one woman who, she was originally from the States, but she'd been living in Italy singing opera for several years, and she came to the program because she wanted to hone her acting skills a little bit, since a lot of times opera singers, they don't incorporate the acting as much, or it's, initially they don't, it's more about the singing. And she's like, well, I want to be able to do both. There was another woman from I forget where she's from, but she's a phenomenal actress. She's in several films and that have been nominated for Sundance Film Festival and everything, but she'd never studied classical acting, and so she came for that. Another woman came from India for that. So there were a few of us that were a bit older in different walks of life that had come for personal growth and exploration rather than just an exchange
Is
program.
there a wide range of ages in this program, or was it mostly people, say, in their 20s or late teens?
I think the youngest was maybe 17, and the oldest in my particular program, I think, was about 35. I think that was the age range in my particular program, but there were 2-year programs, 3-year programs. We were just a semester course, so some of those were a bit different. And there was also a master's in classical acting, so that 1-year course was a lot of a bit older students.
Is this competitive to get into this program, or if you have the money
Um,
and the time, or how's that work?
it is quite competitive. I'd say for the semester program, it's a little slightly less competitive, but it's still yeah, it requires an audition. So I went up to, I think the auditions were in San Francisco, so I had flown up to San Francisco to do the audition for this. I mean, and the school that I went to put out some really big actors. Benedict Cumberbatch is an alumni from there. He came in and did a Q&A while I was studying there. Jim Broadbent, I think, is also another one. There's several really notable actors that have come out of Lambda. So as far as the longer term programs, those are almost cutthroat. The semester one, I think, is a little more relaxed.
So now money runs out, so you come back to Big Bear, is that
Yep.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, I actually spent my life savings going to Lambda, which was worth it. It was worth every penny. But I came back to Big Bear and I got a 9 to 5 job. Like, I got an actual, my initial plan was to move to LA and try to continue with the acting vein, but because I had run out of money, I was like, I need to just get a job. So I did the 9 to 5 job for a while, and then was
How
home
boring.
for, say again?
How boring.
Oh gosh,
For you.
it actually, I I hated it only because I got through things so quickly that half of the day I was just sitting there waiting for more tasks. Like, give me something else to do. Give me something else to do. And so, yeah, stayed there for a while, and then we had some tragedies in the family. My grandmother passed away, and it was actually a blessing in disguise that I was around because I was able to help take care of my grandfather. Was able to, be with family through all of that. And then I went on a 2-month road trip around the states, drove all the way across down to Florida, all the way up the coast to Toronto, all the way back across to Seattle, and all the way back down. And then after the road trip, continued to work for a bit, and then moved to Australia.
Now we get to the next country. To Australia you go.
Yes.
Tell us about that adventure.
Oh, that was great. I went there on a working holiday visa, so I had the ability to work and travel. I When I first got there, I spent my first month living and working with this wonderful family in the Blue Mountains. It was a work exchange, so I just helped out around the house, and they gave me a place to live, and they were just so great. And then in my free time, I would go hiking in the Blue Mountains, and then I moved down to Melbourne, and I lived in Melbourne for the majority of the time I was in Australia. Worked my first retail job in my life. I'm like late 20s, first retail job ever. At an outdoor retail shop. So that was kind of fun because it was something I love hiking. It was something I was passionate about. So I was constantly meeting like-minded people saying, "Oh, I'm preparing for this hike," or "Oh, I'm going to this country to do this." And so that was really cool. And I got a lot of knowledge about different products and different things that, I wouldn't have considered when going on hikes because I was a very amateur hiker. Um, and then after my 6 months of working in Melbourne, a friend that I met in Australia, we had the same dream of driving around Australia. So we bought a camper van together and did the camper van life. So we lived in our van for, I think it was 3 months, and drove around Australia over the course of 3 months. And that was another big loop. We literally drove around the entire country. Um, and that was absolutely amazing and really cool living in a van. Um, Got to go scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef during that road trip. Saw all sorts of wildlife. I did not know there are water buffalo in Australia. Fun fact. Didn't know that until the road trip, and we're driving along and we see these big creatures crossing the road, and I'm like, is that a water buffalo? And sure enough, there's water buffalo in Australia. I knew about the crocodiles. I knew about the kangaroos. But so we got to see some really interesting things.
So
Um,
you were in Australia for about a year,
hmm
and now did you come back to the States before the New Zealand adventure?
I came back for a grand total of 3 weeks.
My,
Um, so I didn't see that many people. Came home for 3 weeks, kind of got things in order, dropped off stuff that I'd had with me in Australia, packed my hiking bag, and flew off to New Zealand.
and
Um,
goal in going to New Zealand was to hike this special trail, right?
Yeah, so I had the same visa in New Zealand that I had in Australia that would allow me to work and travel. And the plan was to spend the first 5 months hiking across New Zealand, and then afterward end up working and staying in New Zealand until my visa was up. And so I got on a plane. I arrived in New Zealand on the 19th, and I started hiking on the 21st of October. And
What's this trail called? It has a name, right?
it does. It's called the Te Araroa. Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, I keep skipping ahead. Tori has another picture of one of the awesome creatures that I saw while I was in Australia, so we're backtracking a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But this is me and this adorable little, I think it's a wallaby. I was in Tasmania at the time. It was freezing cold, and this little guy came to the back of the car to beg for scraps, which he did not get any from us, but some other tourists a couple cars over ended up feeding him. And I'm like, what are you
Yeah, sorry, I
doing?
forgot about that. So let's go back to New Zealand.
Yes, so back to New Zealand. The hike I did is called the Te Araroa. Te Araroa. um, I heard about it in Australia from someone who was living at the same hostel as me, who had done the hike previously. And I'd always been keen about the PCT, but the idea of bears and mountain lions, and you have to hang your food, and there's all these things you have to consider. I just thought it would be so difficult. And I was like, New Zealand doesn't have bears. They don't even have snakes. This is such a good idea. I'll just do that hike. Uh, yeah, I was very naive. So New Zealand might not have wild animals, but it has some pretty intense weather and some pretty intense terrain. And because this hike is relatively new, it's less than a decade old. It was officially opened in 2011.
Tori, why
And
don't you show us some pictures of this hike? We've got 2 or 3 that you might find,
yeah,
and Amber can talk about them. Tori, you there?
so this is actually part of the hike, surprisingly. The cool thing about the hike in New Zealand is that it goes through so much terrain. You're on the beach sometimes, you're in the mountains, other times you're in the forest. There weren't really any deserts, but part of it is there were days where we would spend the entire day walking in a river. The trail was the river. It wasn't like in Big Bear where the snow melts and then the trail becomes a little river. No, no, no. It was an actual river and you're walking in the river. And this section of the TA, there's 2 options. There's a trail that you can walk, or you can do a 5 to 7 day canoe kayak trip. And so I decided I'll give my feet a rest. I'll do the canoe kayak trip. And there was an odd number of us, so I was in the kayak on this day, and we were planning on surprising some friends that didn't know I was joining. They were meeting us slightly downriver, so you can't really see, but on my head is actually a pirate mask that we were planning on bringing down, and I have a bubble sword, and we all had squirt guns, and we were going to attack the friends that didn't know I was around in like a pirate raid. So that's how we spent those 5 days on the river.
Show us another picture, Tori, would you please?
So this is a perfect example of being in the mountains and climbing up a scree slope in the first picture. This was one of my favorite days and sections on the trail, and I really am keen to go back to New Zealand and hike this part again, just because it was so beautiful and so amazing and really challenging. The second picture in this slide is actually from a different part of the trail, but it's an example of, if you look closely, you can see a little tiny stick at the top of that. So that is the trail. What you see right there is the trail. That's what we were climbing up with, you know, 30 to 40 pound packs on, depending on how many days worth of food you had. But that is the trail right there. Um,
And then there's
so,
another slide,
and then
Tori,
there's one
please.
more. And so this is later on in the trail. We've just hiked through several mountains. That's me up on that little cliff up there, but it's looking down kind of into farmland. And so we actually hike down those ridges in the background. I think the trail goes down actually the ridges that you can see right there. And then we walk alongside that big lake and over to a farther lake that's in the distance. And so that
So
was,
did you camp? Did you stay in huts? Tell us
yeah.
about that.
So North Island was mostly camping. Um, a lot of it was paid camping, so it was, a lot of areas was restricted to, you can only camp in these areas. So sometimes a lot of the camping was actually done in holiday parks. So you know, where people would bring their motorhomes or things like that, and you could pay for a campsite and pitch your tent. Because a lot of North Island is quite close to cities. You don't spend a lot of time in the wild, in the bush. You're constantly, every few days you're in a new city. And then once you get to South Island, I hardly used my tent in South Island at all, because South Island has a huge hut system. So sometimes it's the Department of Conservation that has built these huts, sometimes they're private huts. Most of the time they're covered in, if you purchase a hut pass, you can stay in any of the huts. Sometimes the private ones, you pay a small fee or make a donation when you stay there. But what's great about the huts is you don't have to pitch your tent. You don't have to roll up a wet tent the next morning and carry a wet tent the next day, because that adds weight to your pack. You're sleeping inside. There's usually places to hang your food. There's hooks hanging from the ceiling, so that because one thing I didn't realize, although you don't have to hang your food for bears, there are a lot of rats and mice, especially in the huts. So you do have to hang your food from the rats and mice. But
This, so this whole adventure in New Zealand, how long and how many miles?
so it was 3,000 kilometers, which is about 1,900 miles. It takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. I did it in almost exactly 5 months, and I was quite leisurely about it, especially at the end. At the end, I was taking a rest day every 4 to 5 days. I'm like, I'm just gonna take the day off. I'm tired. I need to rest my feet. So, yeah, I wasn't really rushing, but the consequence of me not rushing at the end resulted in 2 days before the end of the hike, New Zealand announced that it was going into lockdown. And we had 48 hours to get to our lockdown location, and we had still had 2 days left to do the hike. And so we're right there at the end, and I was hiking with two friends at the time, and one of them has family in New Zealand, and so we planned to, okay, well, we'll fly up to that family, but we have to get to the end. So we ended up not hiking to the end. We took a taxi down to Bluff, skipped the last, it was about 50 kilometers, a little bit over, and took our finishing picture at the end. And so we didn't get to hike in through the end, which isn't the most terrible thing, because the like some of those pictures that you saw, the one where I said this is my favorite area, those were just amazing parts of the trail. And the end of the trail is actually a day of walking on a road that doesn't have a shoulder, that has big trucks that are driving down it all day long. And so the end of the hike is, it's really not that amazing. It's really anticlimactic. Like, it's just so it wasn't the worst thing, but it still was very disappointing not being able to walk into the end after having walked across the entire country.
Well, I know people have some questions and some comments. Let's just talk a minute about, so now you're the old age of 30. Are you, what do you see for yourself now?
So the two most dominant goals in my life at the moment are, I've completed 2 books, and I would like to get them published. And I'm working on a third at the moment, and so that's one of my main goals. I have submitted them on it in the past to publishers and agents and whatnot, and I think that I really need to just buckle down and not let myself get discouraged and really kind of go forward with that. And then the other big goal in this moment is to get my yoga teacher certification. I do plan on going abroad again. I've been considering for the immediate future going to Vietnam and teaching English again for a little bit. And I plan to move to the UK in January. At the moment, that's the plan.
Something kind of interesting that Amber didn't share. Amber, you actually have dual citizenship, right?
I do, yeah. So my mom is from Canada. She was born in Canada and moved here when she was young, but maintained her Canadian citizenship. And so when I was born automatically into US citizenship and Canadian citizenship. And so my Canadian citizenship allows me to get certain visas that I can't get with my US citizenship. So the visa that I'm looking into for the UK is actually the same visa that I had in Australia and the same visa that I had in New Zealand. It's a working holiday visa, but only available to Canadian citizens.
Well, I think those people that are gathered here may have some questions. So I think it's time for, if you have some questions or some comments, if you'll signal Tori, we'll unmute you and see what Amber has to say.
Or chat.
Julie, did you have a question?
Chat.
Julie?
She's not unmuted.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious, Amber, out of all the places you've been all over the world, what is your favorite Big Bear memory? And why do you keep coming home to Big Bear? I mean, I know it's so special, but.
Well, part of the reason I keep coming home is my mom still lives here. So like, it's always, it's always my home. But my favorite Big Bear memory, oh gosh, that's hard. I don't know if I can pick just one, but a lot of the memories that came to mind were related to theater, whether it was theater in high school and how after every play, all of us would just pile into Denny's and have our Denny's finale dinner, or, hours at the Pack rehearsing. I kind of had this little thing that I would do before each show, before the audience was allowed in. I would go lay on the stage and just stare up at the lights, and just my own little kind of meditation thing. And so I think that there's just a lot of special memories, especially related to theater.
Cool. Tori, I saw a couple of chat questions. Are there something there that's interesting that people are curious about?
Yes. So Amber Carpenter, #1, Well, Amber Carpenter asked Amber, says, hey, Amber, number one, what is the one aspect you learned on your travels that you now take with you every day?
I would say one aspect that I've learned in my travels is to try to keep an open mind. Plans do not always go the way that you think they're going to go, and places are not going to be the way that you expect them to be. So always entering each experience with an open mind of, okay, well, this is what I think it's going to be like, but if it's not, that's okay. And I think that I've kind of taken that with me every day, because that is everyday life of you think you're going to get things done and then you don't, or someone calls and it's unexpected. So I think that's kind of
Cool. For
probably
those of you who haven't, if you have a question, if you'll wave, we'll get to you. And if you have a question, you can either wave your hand or you can do it through chat. Elena has a thought or a question. Tori?
Just a comment, really. If I'm not mistaken, Amber, not too long after your beloved grandmother died and you were helping out your grandfather, in between that and Australia, we did Steel Magnolias.
we did. Mm-hmm.
And it was actually the last Cats production. And really, Amber had the leading role. She played the Julia Roberts role, for those of you who are familiar with the movie. And she was phenomenal. Obviously, this girl has a few talents. And it was just such a special memory. And I just want to say I loved doing that with you. It was great.
I love doing that with you too. That's one of the non-Big Bear High School productions. That was definitely one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. All right. Are there any other chat thoughts, Tori, out there?
Yes. So we have a question from Mike Harrison, and he said, have you ever considered being an astronaut?
So there's actually a funny story that I don't think he's aware of. So it's funny that he asked this, but maybe he is aware of it. I can't remember if I told him this. But so when I was in New Zealand, I only did those freeze-dried meals for one section of my hike, and they did not agree with me. Just terrible stomach cramps, just everything bad, just all the bad things. And so I jokingly said, I could never be an astronaut because I can't eat freeze-dried food, which destroys a dream of mine because I would love to go to space someday. And then the funny part is that about a week after that happened, I was taking one of those stupid Facebook quizzes that's like, what career were you destined to be in? And it said 100% astronaut. And I'm just like, it's not going to work though, because I can't eat the freeze-dried food. Like, it doesn't agree with me. So I have thought about being an astronaut, and I've recently watched quite a few films, Hidden Figures, and a bunch of related to space. And part of me is like, I want to go back to school and get a master's in mathematics and like aeronautics or something, and go work for NASA, because I always find the behind the scenes stuff quite inspiring.
Cool. Are there other chats there, or others of you that have some questions or thoughts for Amber?
There
Any
are
other
any
chats?
currently, not new chats, but you're welcome to post them. If you want to just wave, we can. Oh, Julie, did you put your hand up? All right.
Your moon thing. I have to brag for a minute, Amber. Of course, I'm decades older than you. But if you'd like my autograph, I'm one of the first 13 people on Earth to see live photos from the moon.
What?
Yeah, I was actually just working as a secretary for Jet Propulsion Labs. And,
Okay.
you know, before we ever landed on the moon, we crash landed a spacecraft to take pictures of the terrain. And, of course, I was buddies with all the engineers, so they invited me to go out with them that night when we saw all of the videos coming in. It was just
That's so
a
cool.
moment I'll always treasure. Yeah, I love this space business.
Well, Amber, you certainly have had an interesting life. We'll look forward to following you as things move along. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this time. I'm going to turn it over to Beth to talk about what's coming next Tuesday. Beth, please.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Amber. What a Renaissance woman you are. That was just a fascinating time, and I can't wait to see what you do next. I'm sure none of us can. And at this point, Phil, I really want to thank you for all of these interviews. They have just been amazing. And just everyone be aware that they are all available out on the Big Bear Connected YouTube channel. If you missed any of them, Phil is just a natural interviewer. It's what he does. If you've ever gone anywhere with him, whether it's a busker on the street or a sommelier in a fine restaurant, Phil is going to interview them, and you'll have an interesting experience as a result. So Phil and I have been talking about, he's going to be taking a little hiatus from this program. It won't be the end though. But we thought we might turn the tables just a little bit, because how many of us, but don't answer this, Ron Peavy, how many of us really know Phil? Who knows? He could be some kind of a shady character with, you know, an impressive hat collection. I don't know. So I am going to interview Phil next week. So let me introduce you to Phil, and I'm going to have a lot of fun asking him those probing questions that he has posed to all of us over the years. So please join us. And if you have questions, or maybe even Ron has some stories we should be looking for, please be sure that you send them my way so that we can, you know, put Phil on the hot seat a little bit and have some fun. So huge thanks to everybody for all of it. And hopefully we'll see you next time on Let Me Introduce You to Phil Hamilton.